Good morning, guys. Welcome back to Thread and Glue Designs. This week we are beginning a new book in the Bible. We're going to take a look at the book of Galatians. And I thought we'd do something a little bit different. I thought that with the first video, I would go over some things about Galatia and about the people there so that you'd get a little bit more understanding of what is actually going on. So we'll just start here. I am looking at I've read some commentaries and I've read the Cultural Background Study Bible Notes, and it delves deeper than most of the commentaries that I found. So we're just going to go through it. And the book of Galatians is written by the Apostle Paul. It was to the churches in southern Galatia and perhaps northern Galatia, founded by Paul during his missionary journey. The date was around AD 48 or early 50s. The theme, Paul, a Jewish believer in Jesus, writes to counter the claims of some other Judeans who were telling the Galatian Gentile believers that they must be circumcised and keep the law of Moses in order to truly belong to God's people. If you are unaware of what circumcision is, let me pull up a definition here for you. Just so I say it correctly. Okay, it's the action or practice of circumcising a young boy or man. Well, that doesn't tell me what I wanted to know. Okay. The act of circumcision is especially the cutting off of the foreskin of males that is practiced as a religious rite by Jews and Muslims, and by others as a social custom or for potential health benefits. There is also a version for females, but we're not going to go into that. Let's shrink this back down so I can see what I'm doing here. Okay. And we're going to flip over a couple of pages. This gives a really good explanation. Paul's Jewish opponents. Throughout his Christian ministry, Paul was dogged by Jewish opponents who sought to undermine his message. Some of these challengers were Jews who rejected the messianic claims of Jesus and sought to halt the growth of the church by open persecution, just as Paul himself had once done. On other occasions, however, Paul seems to have been opposed by Jews who were perhaps offended not so much by the fact that Paul preached Christ, but that he did not require Gentiles to embrace distinctively Jewish practices such as circumcision, observance of the Sabbath, and avoidance of non-kosher foods. It appears that the Christians in Galatia had been persuaded not to turn away from Christ, but to become proselytes. Let's look that word up real quick, and I'll give you that definition. And that is okay. Proselytes is, the definition says, a new convert as to faith or cause. So they were just new believers. For Paul, this was an alarming development because it undercut the core message of the gospel. If salvation could not be attained without adding to faith in Christ, then the death of Christ was insufficient. Scholars have become vitally interested in understanding Paul's Jewish adversaries because this issue is key to understanding Paul. The traditional Protestant view is that Paul's Jewish opponents were legalists who believe the salvation is not by grace through faith, but must be earned by good works, which in this case meant adherence to the ritual laws of Judaism. Against this, some have recently argued that first century Judaism was not really legalistic at all, but that it held to the belief that forgiveness was obtained purely by the mercy of God. These scholars charge that Protestants have judged ancient Jews out of the context of the Protestant Reformation, when Luther faced the legalism of Roman Catholic masses and indulgences, rather than truly listening to the first century Jews themselves. To the contrary, such critics insist faithful Jews believed that God had chosen them purely on the basis of His grace, and that He required only that they regulate their lives according to the terms of His covenant. The rules of Judaism. According to this perspective, helped Jews to preserve their identity and faithfulness, but were not a means for acquiring God's favor. This viewpoint on Judaism has led to an altered perspective on Paul. If the early Jews were not in fact legalistic, then our interpretation of some of Paul's words needs significant revision. On the other hand, many believe that it is valid claim that many first century Jews did embrace an excessively moralistic and institutionalized view of religion, and that Paul was reacting against this code. Scholars are currently involved in research to try to determine exactly what these early Jews believed about how God's favor was to be obtained. Even so, it is probably unnecessary to prove that first century Judaism was formally and theologically legalistic in order to demonstrate that many of Paul's opponents were legalistic in their approach to their religion. When Jesus opposed the Jewish leadership, he was concerned not so much with debating the Pharisees over hypocritical elements of theology as with their unregenerated hearts. When religious people are unchanged by God's mercy, they often become harsh and judgmental, adhering to a letter of the law code of moral and ethical standards. Their ability to perform religious rites and duties becomes a substitute for an authentic and personal knowledge of God. This is true in Christian communities as well, notwithstanding the fact that no one disputes that Christianity holds to salvation by grace and not by works as one of its core teachings. Thus, even though many of Paul's opponents may have formally accepted that forgiveness depends entirely upon the mercy of God, in their practical religious lives, they may well have been legalistic. Okay, and so basically what I get out of all of this is, let me go ahead and read the situation part here for you. Jewish people held a range of views about Gentiles. Only the most conservative required circumcision for salvation, as in Acts 15:1, but nearly all would expect it for those who wished to become part of God's people, i.e. Jews. In earlier centuries, many Jews had died for issues such as circumcision and food laws, and anything that resembled compromise on these issues provoked grave discomfort. For Paul, the real experience of the Spirit, the promised reality of the ultimate covenant, to which outward circumcision merely pointed, meant that Gentile Christians could join God's people without becoming ethnically Jewish. Through the Spirit, believers would keep the spirit of the law of love to which the law of Moses always pointed. It is not surprising, however, that not everyone agreed. Less sensitive to the new believers' culture, other Judean missionaries now wanted to convince Paul's converts to adopt ethnic and cultural Judaism to become fully righteous. Paul suggests that they are more concerned about pressures from other Judeans than about the true gospel. The short-lived reign of Agrippa, AD 41 to 44, had rekindled Judean nationalism, and judging others by the standards of one's own culture is a common human temptation. So basically what I'm understanding is that this church in Galatia, the churches there in Galatia, were new converts through Paul's teaching to them. And once they had that down, all of these Jewish people that practiced the religious laws were pressuring them to follow those religious laws, which would be circumcision, Sabbath, all of those things. And that just wasn't a true requirement, but in their religion, it was. So they were more concerned with their religion, with what their religious laws were and following them, than they were in actually having a relationship with Christ and getting to know Him and His forgiveness all as one. So that is our brief introduction to the letters of Galatians, and we will begin next week in chapter 1. I hope this has helped, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next one. Thanks so much. Have a great day.